So in this video, I am going to look at IGCSE Marine Science section 6.1, which is human interactions. And there's a lot to dwell into in this chapter. So this video will be just scratching the surface. The book is awesome here, but there's a lot to go into. So let's get going. As usual, videos here are made for my class and are non-profit. But if you like them, you're more than welcome to use them, and any errors here are mine and mine alone, and does in no way reflect on Cambridge. So the first section the book talks about here in the IGCSE Marine Science book in section 6.1 is about ecosystem service. And ecosystem service is basically how the marine ecosystems are important to us humans. And it goes without saying, of course they are. And the book and the syllabus lists a few that I think are particularly important. The first is recreation and tourism, something we will be talking even more about in section 6.2. But of course, you are gonna benefit from having tourism. And I think many of us know that going to a nice beach somewhere, to a clean beach, is something we'd like to do. Maybe you like to go diving, maybe you like to go sports fishing, surfing, and so on. All that will create an income and help support the local infrastructure. Another ecosystem service is building material, and while we might not think about it a lot, sand and rocks are being harvested from the sea. Corals were originally used as a building material, so is driftwood. In a modern day, we sometimes cut down mangroves, both for building material, for firewood, or to make plates for modern structures. Another very important ecosystem service is coastal protection. Mangroves, especially, and coral reefs, they will absorb energy from the waves and thereby help protect the coast from storm floods, from hurricanes, and so on, which is in many ways kind of sad, since we humans tend to destroy coral reefs and mangroves, so any storms that might come will hit us even worse if we kind of ruin the reef and cut down the mangroves. So there's a lot of reasons to protect our mangroves and our coral reefs, and one of them is they actually help protect us from flooding and storm. Medicine, we do know that there's a lot of marine organisms that contains organic compounds that could be very nice for medicine, and many of them we don't know a lot about yet, so that can be a huge beneficial factor for us in the future. And last but not least, of course, fisheries and food. Since the earliest time, humans who lived nearby the coast have been eating mussels, fish, oysters, and so on. And still today, food from the ocean is an important source of protein for many people, and it's an important source of income for fishing communities. So this matters a whole lot for people living here. In Denmark, where I come from, fishing used to be very big. Now we kind of depleted our fish stocks, and our waters are not so good anymore. Let that be their word of warning. But fishing was a huge industry and was a huge part of people's diet and a huge part of the economic growth. So all that matters. We will go into more detail on each of these a little bit later. The big difference the last 200 years can be seen in a picture like this. Above is how fishing was done a few hundred years ago. You had small boats made of wood, powered by sail, and you sailed out and you set out your nets and your lines, you caught your fish, and you set them back into land. It's quite hard to overexplore a fishing stock by doing that. Today, our fishing boats are bigger, better, and stronger. They can stay out in sea for much longer. They have powerful engines. They can cool their own fish. Some of them are pretty much just floating factories, and they have way better techniques of finding the fish, sonar, and so on. So although the ocean is so big, almost 80% of the world's surface, our ability to do big-scale industrial fishing is now so big that we can actually change the populations in the ocean, and we are doing that. Another reason why human impact is growing is simply the fact that we are now more humans. Human population tend to be stable for a long time, just slightly growing. But after the Industrial Revolution, the amount of humans on the planet has just grown, which leads to more demands on shipping, more demands on fishing, more demands on building material, and so on. So we will have more demands on the marine ecosystem, and that tends to show. We are actually now able to damage the marine ecosystem. For example, here in Denmark, we can now see that the amount of nutrients that get washed out from farmlands especially have reached a level where the eutrophication is so big that many of our fjords and so on are under a lot of pressure, and we tend to have hypoxia happening every summer due to eutrophication. So, tourism, it's nice. It's nice going on a good vacation somewhere, and it's nice going on a good vacation somewhere where there might be some good marine stuff to look at. So while tourism is very good for the local economy, it can also be hard for the environment. And one of the reasons is habitat loss. If we build a hotel right on top of something, well, whatever was there before is no longer there, which means there's less place for the local nature. Also, building on the beaches tend to disrupt the beaches, and we also have the physical disruption just from if you have a lot of people walking up and down the beach. If you are a sea turtle planning to go to the ocean, that can lead to a lot of stress and issue, and that goes for other organisms as well, seals for example. Too many people can also disrupt turtle nests, either by accident or by wanting to look at them. Trash and pollution is sadly a part of mass tourism, some places at least, and plastic in the ocean and plastic on the beach can tend to damage marine organisms. In worst case, it can kill them. Motorboats and diving operators, sometimes they crash with marine life. They can have pollution of the ocean by oil spills or just by noise pollution, which is a huge impact actually on many marine mammals, which use sound for navigation and communication. And recreational fishing, nice as it is, can also have unwanted catches where you might catch endangered species and thereby damage them or in worst case kill them. So while tourism is wonderful for people going on vacation, and while it's very nice for the community who get the income from the tourists, there is a lot that can be done about lessening the impact of tourism, and we will talk about that in section 6.2. As we are becoming more people, and as industrialization is changing the surface of the earth, we build more. That's a thing we humans do. We build stuff. And we need to build hotels, we need harbors, fishing industry, aquaculture, all the stuff we're using for the ocean. Again, this leads to habitat loss. We're simply taking up more space on the coast that is no longer available for nature. We cut down mangroves and so on to get room for all this. This leads again to habitat loss, and it can lead to more pollution, even if we don't want to. Harbors, you can have different paints used on the ship that can damage local environment. You have oil spills, chemical spills. All that can happen in a harbor, even if you don't want to. Desalination plants, which are used in many places, especially as fresh water is becoming a rare commodity, they also cause environmental damage, sadly, although they're quite efficient. And waste and sewage, which comes out from, especially if we don't have waste treatment plants, will leak out into the waters and can lead both to eutrophication and pollution by chemicals and bacteria. So all this infrastructure development, if not done correctly, will also damage the marine environment and can have a quite huge impact, especially waste and sewage can really have a huge impact on the marine environment, also quite far away from the coast. Here in Denmark, for example, we have a huge factory called Cheminova, who made pesticides, and they have been dumping all kind of bad stuff both on the beach and the ocean, which have led to a lot of pollution going out into the ocean, which is not very good when you already have a marine environment here that's under a lot of stress. Resource removal is also a factor that can damage the marine environment. Here we're talking about sand removal, rock fishing, cutting down mangroves for wood, and then stuff like corals. Sand removal is a huge thing because sometimes we need sand for construction on the beaches. We can need sand for other purposes, and then we just take the sand from the beach. We can also have mud removal from estuaries. In general, this tends also again to lead to habitat loss. The species who live there can't live there while we're digging, and they'll also lead to more disturbed water. There'll be more sand, mud, so on in the water, which some species, especially like corals, they like their water clear. So if you are a clear water-loving species, having more disturbed water is not a good thing. Rock fishing is another thing, that huge rocks were taken from the ocean bottom and used for construction, for piers, for churches, for many things. And while that might not seem intuitive, removing those rocks also removes extra habitat for animals. There are many animals who really like to live in shelter by huge rocks, and when we remove them, well, we remove breeding ground, which again leads to a loss of places to live for the different animals. Cutting down mangroves for wood or for construction is also a huge issue because the mangroves are a unique ecosystem with a high biodiversity, and it's also help protect the coast from storm surges. Lastly, picking up souvenirs. Again, we might not think about it, like breaking off a single piece of coral, what does that matter? It's just one single piece. Yeah, but when many people do it every year, it can lead to damage to the reefs. The same by picking up endangered species, taking home for a souvenir. Again, you might think it's just one shell, but again, if millions of people are doing it, over time it can have a hard impact on the marine environment and on species who are already threatened. Now, of all the things we can do to the marine environment, and there's quite a few, apart from dumping nuclear fuel or nuclear testing, which sadly has been done, blast fishing is about some of the most damaging thing we can do to the ocean environment. If you throw explosive into the water, it will kill or stun a lot of fish. They will drift to the surface, and then you can collect a lot of fish very fast. You don't have to use a net, you don't have to use a line, anything. The problem is, of course, that the blast wave will damage a lot of animals in the ocean, not just the one you want to catch, but basically everything. It is kind of the same as picking up apples by blowing up your apple trees and then picking up the apples from the ground. Yes, that might be a way to do it, but you won't get many apples the next year. And that's a problem about blast fishing. You degrade the environment, so next time there'll be way less fish to get. Cyanide fishing is where you use a small amount of toxin to stun the fish, to get fish for corals, for example. That also damage the corals, and it's a very bad thing to do. So these destructive kind of fishing is something that we really need to work on limiting. Sadly, it's still being done some places. But again, here we need, policing. We need governments to take action, because stuff like blast fishing is just very bad for the marine environment. Aquaculture, we're going to talk way more in detail about this later, but aquaculture is kind of a double-edged sword. On one way, it's a good way to get a lot of resources fast. We get a lot of protein, we get a lot of food, fast, cheap, and safely. On the other hand, it can lead to habitat loss as we cut down mangroves. It can also lead to diseases spreading from, the animals we have in the aquaculture to the wild population, and it can lead to pollution. And lastly, if you have a lot of animals in a very tight environment, that can lead to a lot of nutrients leaking into the water, which can lead to eutrophication. We talk about diseases. One of the things we often talk about is how, for example, fish lice is a huge issue on salmon farms in Norway. And again, it will affect the salmons you have in your tanks, your nets, but it will also affect the wild population. So without wanting to, you end up damaging the local fish stock by the stuff you do to the aquaculture. On the other hand, done right, aquaculture can limit the amount of fishing we need to do. It can give us a safe income. It's less damaging than fishing. So again, all of this depends on if it's being done in a good way or in a bad way. Oil spills is a sad thing that happens sometimes. Our economy still depends a lot on fossil fuels, and one of the ways we can move fossil fuels is by oil tankers. And we also drill offshore to get oil up from the ground. How that affects the climate and greenhouse effect we'll talk about later in detail. But oil spills can be very damaging for the environment, and they can happen both by drilling and if we have accidents by sailing. Sometimes it also happens when a ship wants to clear its tanks and don't want to pay for it, so they do it out in the open ocean. Oil will damage the wildlife, especially the marine birds will get the feathers damaged from the oil. You can also see death of other marine wildlife. And we're going to talk about this in detail later, but in general, oil spill is something you really want to avoid. Okay, endangered species. In general, we talk about all species, seeing how they're going from least concern, which is green, to critically endangered, which is called red. So we have a red listed species. Those are species which are under a lot of pressure, and if you don't do something, they can go extinct. So, for example, if you have species in the LC, least concern, well, they're probably doing okay. But if you have them in the critically endangered, they are not doing well. And then we have the two ones we don't want to be in, extinct in the wild and extinct. And again, our ocean is so big that, well, how can species go extinct in the ocean? Well, sadly, they can. And we have seen species gone extinct, either from over exploring, from hunting, or from just, destruction of the local habitat. And although it's a bit out of sight the syllabus, we're just going to look at a few of them here, because I do think it's important to know the story of the species who are no longer here. The Caribbean monk seal is one of the species we have managed to wipe off this planet, which means it's no longer here. It used to be here. It was a cute little seal, and now it's gone. And that's the hard thing about extinction, is it's final. It doesn't mean there's only a few left. It means that they are now gone and we'll never see them again. So that is the harsh truth, that extinction is pretty final. And sometimes we are the cause of it. Some of the animals who are especially feeling the pressure of human activities are the river dolphins. Because we see more pollution in the big rivers, we see plastic, we see more shipping. That also means there's less food for the river dolphins. There are bigger chances of them getting hurt by getting hit by shipping, by getting sick by pollution, getting caught in fishermen's webs and so on. So the river dolphins of this world are under a lot of pressure, and sadly there are species who are no longer with us anymore. River dolphins who are now gone extinct. We haven't seen them for many years, or maybe we're lucky and find a few somewhere, but if they're too few, they can't sustain a viable population. So if the numbers get too small, eventually the population will go extinct. And personally, I think it's sad to live in a world where we no longer have amazing animals like the Yangtze river dolphin.